Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: China woos Global South and embraces Putin at Beijing summit. Putin and Xi to meet on Wednesday. Russia's Putin speaks to Iran, Israel, Palestinians, Syria and Egypt. Putin and the Taliban head to Beijing for a Belt and Road conference. Belt and Road, just how successful is Xi's Chinese dream? China woos Global South and embraces Putin at Beijing summit. The Guardian. World leaders are gathering in Beijing for China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, forum, the third such event since the trademark Global Development Drive was launched by President Xi Jinping 10 years ago. The BRI was originally envisioned as a vast physical and digital infrastructure project to connect China with Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe and the rest of the world. It later broadened into a mammoth infrastructure financing vehicle for Chinese lenders to support projects in nearly every corner of the world, particularly in the Global South. Putin and Xi to meet on Wednesday. Yahoo! Russian President Vladimir Putin will hold talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in two formats during his visit to China on October 18, according to Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov. The two leaders will first communicate in an expanded group and then in the format of a business breakfast. Ushakov noted that there may also be an opportunity for one-on-one discussions outside of these formats. Putin will be accompanied by a delegation of senior civil servants and businessmen. During his visit, Putin will speak at the One Belt, One Road Forum and promote the idea of the Greater Eurasia concept. Russia's Putin speaks to Iran, Israel, Palestinians, Syria and Egypt. Reuters. Russian President Vladimir Putin has entered the diplomatic fray in the Middle East, speaking to 5 major players in an attempt to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Putin has spoken to Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and plans to speak to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Putin has stated that the United States and the West have ignored the need for an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders and that the U.S. is responsible for the crisis. Putin and the Taliban head to Beijing for a Belt and Road conference. Telegraph. China is hosting a 2-day Belt and Road conference in Beijing this week to mark the 10-year anniversary of its global infrastructure building scheme. The conference will gather representatives from around 130 countries and 30 global organizations to discuss the ambitious development program. Russian President Vladimir Putin and members of Afghanistan's Taliban government are among the attendees. Putin confirmed his attendance in September, marking a rare overseas trip for the Russian leader. China has been steadily boosting engagement with the Taliban, becoming the first country to appoint an ambassador to Kabul since the group took power. Belt and Road, just how successful is Xi's Chinese dream? Deutsche Welle. Leaders and representatives from over 100 countries are attending China's third Belt and Road Summit, which marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. The BRI has expanded to Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, exceeding the scale of the ancient Silk Road, but it is facing more challenges than ever before. The BRI has transformed from early-stage infrastructure construction to energy control and an important strategic military outpost. It is becoming an important strategic military outpost, as China hopes to push its diplomatic, military, and political influence outward through national efforts. China has become the largest creditor for many developing countries, and the West has criticized China's conduct of debt trap diplomacy through the BRI. One of the most common examples is Sri Lanka, which declared bankruptcy in 2022. China is Sri Lanka's largest creditor, accounting for about 52% of its total debt, approximately $7.3 billion. Chinese capital steps up security ahead of Belt and Road Forum. South China Morning Post. Security in Beijing has been tightened ahead of the Belt and Road Forum, which marks the 10-year anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The increased security measures come in the wake of a knife attack on an Israeli embassy employee. Police have banned the use of civilian drones in the city and commuters have reported longer waits at checkpoints. The China National Convention Center, where the summit is taking place, has been sealed off to the public, with roads closed and subway exits blocked. The security measures reflect the heightened tensions both domestically and internationally. Leaders gather in China for smaller, greener Belt and Road Summit. The Globe and Mail. The Third Belt and Road, BRI, Summit, a major event for China's Belt and Road Initiative, will be attended by Hungary's Viktor Orbán, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and a minister from the Afghan Taliban, but no senior EU leaders are expected. Western skepticism of the BRI stems from China's failure to address concerns about its intentions and a lack of transparency. Italy, the only G7 nation to join the initiative, is now looking to exit. Meanwhile, China is trying to make the BRI smaller and greener, focusing on high-tech projects to promote a multipolar world order. Xi and Putin to reunite in Beijing in show of solidarity as divisions with the West sharpen. CNN. Russian President Vladimir Putin is visiting China this week to attend the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. This will be Putin's first known trip outside of Russian-controlled territory this year. The forum is a significant event for both leaders, as it marks 10 years since the start of Chinese President Xi Jinping's global infrastructure funding drive, and allows China to showcase its growing global ambitions. Putin's attendance is an opportunity for Russia to show that it still has a strong friend in China. The two leaders have met 40 times in the past decade and have become increasingly aligned in presenting an alternative worldview to the one offered by the West. Both China and Russia have criticized Israel's actions in response to last week's attack by Hamas and called for a ceasefire. Putin and Xi are expected to discuss the situation during their meeting this week. Experts do not believe that China will put pressure on Russia to end its invasion of Ukraine, as Chinese policymakers do not want to see any level of distrust between Beijing and Moscow. Israel's allies have been reluctant to use the R word. Now's the time. The Sydney Morning Herald. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to destroy Hamas following its recent attacks on Israeli civilians. While Israel has the military capability to defeat Hamas, it runs the risk of losing if it overreacts and turns its strength against itself. The U.S. made this mistake following the 9/11 attacks, invading Iraq and destabilizing the Middle East, leading to the rise of ISIS and the strengthening of Iran. Netanyahu has the opportunity to damage and dismantle Hamas if he deploys Israel's military effectively, but he must avoid killing innocent civilians. Israel has already warned civilians to leave the combat zone, setting itself above Hamas as a more just and moral force. However, Israel is guilty of collective punishment by cutting off food, water, and power supplies to the entire population of Gaza. It must be careful in its use of force to avoid causing a humanitarian disaster and losing international support. If Israel fails to act with restraint, it risks emboldening its enemies, such as Iranian proxy forces and Hezbollah, and becoming embroiled in a fruitless Middle East war. Live Ukraine-Russia War Live, Ukrainian children to be released to Qatari diplomats in Moscow. Telegraph. Qatar has helped facilitate the release of 3 Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia. The release is part of a plan Qatar has set up to return many more children from Russia to Ukraine. In addition, Qatar recently facilitated the return of another Ukrainian child who was reunited with his grandmother and is now en route to Ukraine. Kiev has identified 20,000 children who have been taken to Russia or Russian-held territory without the consent of their family or guardians. This news comes as Russia launched missiles and kamikaze drones at Ukraine in an overnight attack. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, we have a lot of interesting news to discuss, so let's dive right in. First, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, forum taking place in Beijing, where world leaders are gathering to discuss China's ambitious global development drive. The BRI, originally envisioned as an infrastructure project, has now become a mammoth financing vehicle for Chinese lenders. This initiative has been particularly focused on the Global South, and China has become the largest creditor for many developing countries. However, there have been concerns raised about China's conduct of debt trap diplomacy. For example, Sri Lanka, one of the most common examples, declared bankruptcy in 2022. So, while the BRI has been successful in expanding China's influence, it is not without its challenges and criticisms. Another significant event is the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Putin's visit to China comes at a time when divisions with the West are sharpening. The two leaders have met numerous times over the past decade and have increasingly presented an alternative world view to that of the West. They are expected to discuss the recent crisis between Israel and Hamas, as both China and Russia have criticized Israel's actions. However, it is unlikely that China will put pressure on Russia to end its invasion of Ukraine. Speaking of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, Qatar has facilitated the release of 3 Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia without the consent of their family or guardians. This is part of a larger plan to return many more children from Russia to Ukraine. As tensions continue to escalate, Russia launched missiles and kamikaze drones at Ukraine in an overnight attack. In conclusion, the Belt and Road Initiative continues to shape China's global influence, but it is not without its challenges. The meeting between Putin and Xi showcases their alignment in presenting an alternative worldview. And as the Ukraine-Russia conflict intensifies, Qatar is playing a role in facilitating the return of Ukrainian children from Russia. That's all for today's news update. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these developments? Do you have any questions? Let's start a discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.